أنا اسمي ياسين الرزقي. I'm a developer advocate عن جوجل في لندن. نخدم على الأندرويد all the time. أنا بديت نخدم على الأندرويد كي دخلت عن جوجل، عندي تو تقريبا عامين، وما كنتش نخدم الأندرويد بجملة. قبل كنت ويب ديفلوبر، وما كنتش نخدم بالجافا والكوتلين جملة، وبديت نتعلمهم كي دخلت في الخدمة هذيك. و في اللول ما فهمتهاش برشا. ما هو الاندرويد كامل هي عالم اخر ما كنتش مغروم به، وبشويه بشويه تعلمت. والايامات I focus on privacy, Jetpack Compose، وزاد اندرويد ستوديو في الاندرويد. اليوم باش نتكلموا على الاندرويد 11. ما هو I'm pretty sure عملت ديجا البرزنتيشن على الاندرويد at the beginning، ما كنتش لنا قبل. So what's new in Android 11؟ اليوم باش نتكلموا على the platform، ايش حطينا في الفريم ورك، ايش حطينا في البلاتفورم in terms of API changes، وباش نتكلموا زاده شويه على the new tools اللي حطيناه. وكان عندي شويه وقت نحب نتكلم زاده على new libraries مازال خرجناهم ولا ما عندهمش برشا. نحب نتكلم على الأقل اللي كان عندي درجة على الجيت باك كومبوز، بروجي كبير عملناه ونحب نكلمه. وكان عندكم سؤال تفضلوا حطهم في الكومنتات نجاوب من بعد إن شاء الله. So في الأول خلينا نتكلموا شوية على اليو اي. فما the window insets API هذيك ان API برشا ناس يستعملوها باش يعرفوا the borders of the screen، باش هكاك تنجم تعرف كان الكلافيي محلول ولا لا. كان ما هو فما برشا كونستركتور كما سامسونج، كما ال جي، كما نوكيا، كما اخرين، كلهم عندهم different screen size. معنا باش تنجم تعرف انها اللي وين تنجم تحط الابليكيشن نتاعك، كيف تنجم you draw it on the screen. the window insets API تعاونك برشا باش تنجم تعرف هكاك. وما ولا يمات ما فما اكثر من التليفون، فما زاد التابلت، فما زاد المنقلات، فما حتى الكروم بوك تنجم تستعمل اندرويد فيه. معنا فما برشا سكرينز، وباش تعرف انه the coordinates of the screen صعيب باش هكاك نجم تحط كل شيء في الابليكيشن نتاعك. the window insets API تعاونك برشا عليه. وزاد مش كان the clavier، نجم تعرف زاد the status bar، the navigation bar، هكاك باش تاخذ the information، وهكاك نجم تعرف وين نجم you render your application. تحط a listener on the main view. تاخذ the main view of your activity or your fragment، وتحط عليه a listener. Here the method is set on apply window insets listener، وفي الكالباك نتاعك تجيك informations. So here we can query، we can نسلو the insets object، and we can نجم نعرف كان الكلافيي محلول ولا لا. here with the IME معنى الكلافيي نجم تشوف كان هو محلول ولا لا. So when you use the insets object, you can query, as I said, the IME to know if the keyboard is open or not, as well as checking also the status bar. All of that, you can do it within this set on apply window insets listener. So within this callback, you can just query the insets object, get those information, and be able to render your application based on the information provided by the insets object. So here, a big deal there is, as I mentioned, with all the diversities of devices, it's really hard for you to hard code values to say, oh, with the Samsung phones, the keyboard just takes 60 pixels. With this phone, it takes 50 pixels. With these Google Pixel phones, it will take, I don't know, 100 pixels. you should never rely on hard-coded values because people may use their devices in different ways. So instead of assuming different hard-coded values, and as you know, the Android diversity of devices is quite big, I highly advise you to use the Window Insets API, which is available on Android 11 and helps you to deal with all that diversity. The next part that we introduce in terms of UI changes is the IME animations. So that's a big deal for people who really want to synchronize animations that match when the keyboard is open or closed. So in this case, let's say you want to be able to have a fancy animation when you send a message. So you're clicking the send button from the keyboard is getting closed, as well as having an animation on your app. Now you can synchronize your application animations with the keyboard animation. So once it's getting open or getting closed, you can listen for the changes there. You can figure out also if the screen will be opened or not based on the different devices I mentioned earlier. You will be able to figure out all of those data directly through the IME Animations API. Again, rather than you having to hard-code values in your app, you can just rely on that, and you will have the same behavior, whatever OEM will be using Android underneath. So in terms of how it looks like, let me show you a quick screencast of that. So as you see now, when you scroll, for example, let's say you want to scroll from the bottom to the top, you can have the keyboard sliding up and your application adapting to it, rather than having this kind of clunky just open and close. And usually in terms of user experience, it's not the best way to show users this kind of behavior. So now with Android 11, you can play with those IME animations. Another screencast here is just to show you how it looks like, but to understand how it looks like in terms of code, let's see this use case. So here we create our callback on the window Insets animations, and whenever we have the dispatch mode stop to say that it's gonna be closed or not, you will be able to figure out within those override callback methods what's the status of the keyboard, or also what's the coordinates of the keyboard. So here, all of that is available on Android 11. Again, there were already some methods to do that before, but sometimes they were not reliable. Here, the systems really assure you that when the keyboard is going to be open or closed, or at least during the transition, you can get all the information directly within those methods. And if you want to animate yourself the keyboard directly, because let's say you have some gestures on your app that you want that to be matched with the keyboard, you will be able to do that here directly with the window Inset controller, which is attached to one of your edit text views. So you will be able to do it in that way. It's really simple and light code, not that complicated, and again, available in Android 11. If you want to have a full sample on that, we've added a full sample available on GitHub, and that explains you a lot on it. And if you want to hear more about what's animated IME in general, my colleagues Chet, Roman, and I think I forgot who might be there. It may be Chris Baines. They made a podcast on it, so it's the episode 138, and I highly advise you to listen to it if you're really interested about the window Insets animations. So that was for the IME and Insets animations so far. Now let's go to the bubbles. So the bubbles, they were introduced in Android 10, but we didn't make it properly available. It was more of a developer preview in a way. And now they're available in Android 11. So for the ones who have been using some social networks application, you probably have seen them before. It's just this kind of icons that is placed on top of your other apps. And when you click them, you will be able to see your message and chat there directly. Here, the changes is rather than application using the overlay API, so just painting on top of the current screen, here it's the system handling that. So first, it's a cleaner API, and you can combine a lot of applications. So I know Telegram is supporting that because I use it, but there's definitely way more applications supporting that. So rather than having many icons just popping up across all your screen and polluting your screen, you will have just a single one. And next to the avatar icon you can see, you will have the other social network or other social application showing you there. So it helps you really to switch between your current screen, your current application to messages without having to change completely the screen. So it's just a quick access, makes it way more reachable from anywhere for users to be able to interact with their favorite social applications. So that's the Bubble API. And to be able to use it, so it's basically a notification that can also show up as bubbles. So it's not like a completely different API. It's something that has been already existing. It was, as I mentioned, on Android 10 as a developer option. And now finally, with feedback, with iterations from our teams and developers, it's available on Android 11. And it's better than System Alert Window, as I mentioned before, because here it's a really dedicated API for it, and it's easier for everyone to be able to interact with it. So if you want to, for example, to close it, you just have to drag down the bubble to the bottom, and it's the same behavior. So it's not like each application having their own system to close the bubbles. Here it's again handled directly by the system. You create one with the notification API, so at least you can show a different way for all the APIs. So you don't have to use an entire different API. It's really made on top of the existing ones. You just have to provide more metadata, basically, to have this this behavior by the system UI. And you need a dedicated activity for that. So the way you have to declare it in your manifest is by adding this resizable activity. So obviously it's not a new property, it has been existing, but you need that for your activity. Otherwise your activity won't be launched. Because again, as you've seen in the screenshot, the screen is much smaller inside the bubble. So that's why we need to make sure that the activity is resizable. And in terms of code, the way you do it is you create an intent with the bubble activity or whatever you call it, but basically the activity that will be rendered when you touch that bubble. And when you send that intent, you have to notify by adding those metadata as mentioned, and I send it through the notification API. And finally, by adding all of those behavior, you will have that bubble coming up to the screen. So whenever you have a new message, you will use this API, it will appear on the screen. And if the user is already on a bubble, you will just have one more avatar with the person the user is talking to, and the icon of your application on top of it, a small icon on the bottom right, if I don't say mistake. And that's the way the Bubble API works. Obviously, for older Android versions, it's not available, so you will just show notification as previously. We have a full sample using Kotlin on Bubbles, which is available there. I don't have the full address, so normally it's on our GitHub. So you should just look for user interface samples on our GitHub. So it's GitHub/Android. You should find one project which is user interface samples, /Bubble Kotlin. We have other user interface samples there, but if you're interested on the Bubble one, here it is. And if you want to understand more about the Bubbles API, how it came from, we have, again, another podcast episode on it. It's the 140th, sorry, my bad. So that was mainly on UI. So we've seen the IME, the Insets, the IME Animations, as well as the Bubbles. Now let's go to privacy. I think, if I don't say mistake, there is a full talk on privacy afterwards. So I'm just going to give a quick overview, but feel free to ask me questions on it or for the next speaker talking on it. So Android 11, here's our little joke. The goal of it is to really focus as much as possible on privacy. We did that throughout many Android versions, but Android 10, we made a big push for it, and Android 11 continues in that spirit. So one first API we're adding, which will help definitely a lot of developers, is data access auditing. So again, because there is a full talk on it, I'm just going to resume here. It's basically whenever you're accessing location, contacts, microphone, or other APIs that are attached to the context object, you will be able to listen to that. So you will be able to create a listener whenever one of those APIs is called, will trigger your callback. And like that, you can figure out which parts of your code is calling the location, for example. So the goal is mainly to figure out why your application is using location. So obviously, if it's your own code, you can just figure out by yourself. But if it's really huge code, maybe hundreds of thousands of lines of code, if it's not millions of lines of code, maybe really hard for you to know where it is. Or sometimes you're using an open source library or a closed source SDK, and that SDK or library may be calling one of those APIs and you don't know about it at all. So with this, in terms of code, is you need to create an app ops manager on op noted callback, and this callback will be notified whenever you're trying to access those events. So the interesting part here is you don't have to change that much of your code. By default, you will be able to get all your callback will be triggered whenever you're accessing one of those context-related privacy API. Your callback will be triggered. But there is also a feature where you can say this part of the code, so this part of my code where I'm accessing the context, I want that to be labeled as my sign up feature, my login feature, my find friends feature. The other presenter who will talk about it will give more example on that, so I let him or her discuss more about it. So that was the data access auditing. It mainly to help you figure out which parts of your code is calling which privacy-related API. Now onto one-time permissions. This is a big win for me, and I think for a lot of users, is when you don't want to give permission all the time to one specific sensor. So it can be a camera, it can be microphone, it can be the location. So imagine you're using an application not that often, and they're asking you to contact their support. They need to access your location to provide better feedback, for example, or better support, but you're not comfortable giving that all the time. With this API, you can say, I only give it this time. So it means when you have when you have a foreground service using the API, or when your activity is visible, open, you will be able to access that. But as soon as you close the foreground service or you close your application, that permission is being removed. So when you will have, as a developer, when the user reopen the app and you ask for that permission, you need to check you have the permission rather than using straight away, because maybe it has been just granted only this time. But also with Android 10, we start to provide more notifications to the user to say, this application have been using the location recently. Do you want to change that or not? So the users may change by themselves the permissions, which was always possible on Android, but it's not something users have been doing often, while from Android 10 has been more common. And now with Android 11, there is this easy way to give it only for this specific time. And on background location, we provide more restrictive access. So you can't ask for background location from the beginning. You cannot say, please give me a background location straight away. You need first to have access to the permission while the application is running. So which is normally, if I go back to the screenshot, is while using the app. If that has been granted, you can after that ask to get the background location. So to do some geofencing, for example. But from the beginning, asking for it is not something that we're allowing. Next, we're adding more support for the foreground services. So for the one who are not really familiar with this concept, is the service that have an active notification. So the notification that you can see all the time. Whenever you use some GPS or navigation related application, you can see that the application is using the location and you have this active notification you cannot remove. It's really to give more information, more transparency to the user. Obviously, as soon as you close the application or you remove a foreground service, you stop it, that notification disappears. Before it was available on location and few other types of service, and now we extended also for microphone and camera. So again, big win to transparency for users. So Android 10 required manifest attribute for location only, and now Android 11 adds support for camera and microphone. So you need to have that to be able to use those within your foreground service types. And in terms of change, it's really just an attribute to add to your service. So it's not like you have to change code. It's really just more transparency in your manifest. The thing here is sometimes developers don't understand what's the point, what's the goal, why should I be more transparent? It's mainly for users. If they don't feel confident about your application using any of these privacy-related API, they might not grant you access. So to avoid getting denied the access, you should be more transparent, and we're helping that with the system to show when an application is using a specific service or a specific privacy sensor, a private sensor like camera, like microphone, like location. When you're becoming more transparent with your users, you will have less denial, you will have less rejection in terms of permissions. But also we're bringing more changes. So one which is really important, it's the package visibility restrictions. By default, you won't be able to see other installed apps as a developer if you target Android 11. There is a way to work around that. And again, the speaker who will talk about privacy will give more details, so I won't talk more about it. And scope storage, we added some improvements. So you can use the file API directly if you need, specifically for applications that use native libraries like FFmpeg or games that are not comfortable using a GNI. And there is also batched editing of media files that's really handy in terms of user experience. But again, I should not speak too much about it because there is far enough on that by the next speaker. So that was everything about privacy on Android, obviously in a resumed way, but please stay on the next talks to learn more about it. And now onto developer goodies. So some features we've added in our tools to help you as a developer being more productive on Android. So the first one is Wi-Fi debugging. So that has been something that existed for a while, but it was a bit unknown. And the way you had to start a service, you had to launch ADB in a TCP mode. It's not something people were comfortable with. And nowadays we're having laptops that don't have that much of ports. And this picture is actually the laptop of Chet, my colleague in America. And as you can see, nowadays we're having a lot of cables, but not a lot of ports, which is really hard when you have to unplug, plug, unplug, etc. So now with Wi-Fi debugging, what you can do is accessing your device with Android Studio through Wi-Fi. So if they're connected to the same Wi-Fi, you will have to enable it first in the settings, in the developer settings of your device. You will be able to run an application. You will be able to debug it directly from Android Studio without having to put any cable. So you just have to connect it, obviously with the debugging mode enabled on your device. And on Android Studio, it will appear and you can just connect with it. There is a pairing mode where you have to scan a QR code from Android Studio, and that's available from the last Android Studio 4.1 Canary 8, if I don't say mistake. It has been released a few days ago. So download that, and you won't be able, and you won't need to plug a cable anymore. So again, really really to save you time rather than having to plug cables all the time or making sure a cable is working or not. Now you can just do Wi-Fi debugging. A second thing, we're adding for developers, and that's a huge improvement for the developer experience specifically for Kotlin developers, is we're bringing some of these annotations on framework. So recently nullable, recently non-null, as well as nullable and non-null, to allows you, as you know, for the people who have been using Kotlin for a long time already are used to this specific issue, is it's hard to figure out what's if an object is null or not in Java. You always have to do it if this object is not null to be able to play with it. While in Kotlin, we have a native support. It's just the interrogation mark to be able to say this object, this variable may possibly be null. Here, we're adding more of these annotations directly in the framework. So on the Kotlin side, if we're having those annotations, you will be able to figure out if an object can possibly be null or not, and play with it specifically with dotlet, for example, which is one of this method that allows you to quickly figure out if an object is null or not, and be able to do a specific behavior if it's non-null without having to do the if-else, as you know. So we're adding more of those onto the framework, and from now on, any new API that can be null will have those flags to help you figure out. So that's for the nullability annotations. We're bringing a lot of those onto the framework on the platform. And now on crash reasons reporting. So that's something really important whenever your application can crash, possibly for a null, but that can be that there is possibly another reason why. Before, it was kind of hard to figure out. There is some solutions, some open source solutions, some commercial solutions to help you that, but it was not handy to do it just by yourself without having to rely on third-party libraries. So with the crash reasons reporting, basically we have some code here which, with the activity manager, you can get the historical process exit reasons. So all the reasons why your application crashed recently on a specific device, you can get all of them, query them, and you can see it's because maybe you don't have enough memory, maybe because it was just a crash due to your code. So you can pull all of that and say, oh, sorry, we've seen that recently the application crashed. Could you give us some feedback? So you can really interact with the user, or at the opposite, upload those data automatically to your server to get more insights. There is obviously Crashlytics from Firebase that helps you a lot with that, but here there is just a native solution to get the recent crash on a device without having to rely on a third party. So it's limited. It doesn't provide as much historical data in the long term with all the devices like Crashlytics, but for specific use cases, it can be really powerful to do that if you just want to do everything directly on the device.
Mr. Yacine?
Yeah.
I think you still have 15 minutes. We will start discuss about question at the last 5 minutes.
Okay. So in that case, I will go a bit quicker to make sure that I will meet those goals. So in that case, let me just switch directly through ADB Incremental. So I'm skipping the GW ASAN API. It's a really narrow and native API specifically for native developers, so the one who use C, C++. I highly recommend you to have a look online, but because we're tight on time, I will go quickly on the one that may excite you more. So ADB Incremental. So that's something really powerful we also brought with Android 11. The goal is, if you're trying to install a big application, so maybe you may be a game or really huge application that may be hundreds of megabytes to install, which maybe takes a long time to put on a device when you debug. Here with ADB Incremental, we basically allows to just send the changes. So ADB can figure out what are the changes that you can send. So rather than having to send the whole APK, we can just send chunks of it. So it's much faster. In some cases, even 10 times faster. So to be able to use it, you just do ADB install -- incremental. Now onto the behavior changes. So what we did is we protected most of the behavior changes with target SDK R. So like that, you have more time for you to get prepared, and you don't have to, because Android 11 has been launched this week, you don't have to rush, but I highly recommend you to migrate as soon as you can to the next target SDK, which is Android 11. And the big change we also brought is the behavior toggles. So sometimes it's hard for developer to test a feature because you have to use Android 11, Android 10, Android 9 device, etc. Here, what we did is through the command line or the developer options panel, you can enable or not the new features. So you can, in this case, for example, you can disable the scope storage or not. You can disable the package visibility or not. Obviously, it's just for developer purpose, but it helps you really go through quickly on it without having to use different devices all the time. So we also have some changes related to graphics and media, mainly about native encoders. But again, I really want to go straight to the end to not miss all the questions. So there's a lot of APIs. I highly recommend you to have a look. There's presentation by my colleague Chet on what's new in Android 11. Just have a look on it. Now let's go to Autofill. So Autofill, if you are not aware of it, is the API that allows you to fill passwords, addresses, usernames directly without having to write them all the time. So previously, the only way to interact with it was for application to draw directly on top of other apps using accessibility APIs. But sometimes the integration wasn't great, or sometimes the application doesn't handle those accessibility informations. So what we did with keyboards or password apps is they can integrate directly with the keyboard and still protect you in terms of privacy. So let me just show you directly what it means in terms of UI. So you can see here the person trying to log in, and you will have the credentials coming just on top of the keyboard. So what we're doing here is we're sending information to the keyboard to say, hey, this person can log in with these credentials. Here are the credentials to be able to, when the user just want to click on them, we will write them directly in those inputs. The really interesting part of what we did here is we're just sending kind of empty entries, in the sense that the keyboard cannot actually see the content of them. We're just saying, here's the first credential, here's the second credential, but they cannot see the details of them. So you're still protected in terms of password. Third-party application cannot access directly those credentials. And it's the same for credit card, for phone numbers, addresses. It really allows you to save time and still protect your privacy. And in terms of code, that's really specific to keyboard. So I may just skip straight till the end and just ask directly the questions. I know it has been much shorter than what I thought, but I really don't want to miss the questions. First thing, if you have questions and we don't have time to answer them, just follow me on Twitter, Rezgui. Send me a tweet. I will try to answer as soon as I can. Otherwise, happy to answer the questions right now.
Thank you, Mr. Yacine. Thank you. We'll start with the question right now. Please, guys, if you have any questions, ask it in the comment. Mr. Aaron Nerox asked, is there any new APIs that help depth, display, notes, and notches?
For notches, so directly with notches, so to be able to figure out up until where can you draw, the Inset API is mainly for that. So sometimes you have fonts with notches, sometimes not. I highly recommend you to just have a look on how the Insets API works. You have all the information to be able to figure out what's the right way to draw on the screen. The Insets API is for that.
Yeah. And another question from the same guy. Is it right that when the user is it right that when the user doesn't use an app frequently, the permission will be revoked automatically?
Yeah. So normally that's mentioned by the other speaker. I didn't want to deep dive too much on that, but we have adding a system, yes, now where you, after a while, if an application hasn't been used by the user, we may drop the permission grant. In terms of code, doesn't change that much, because whenever you're accessing the location, the camera, or any of those API, you always have to check if you have the permission. So if you just get it once and you assume you have it all the time, you should not do that, because the person may using only this time, as I showed, or the permission can be dropped automatically by the system to protect, again, the user privacy.
Yeah, thank you. Till now, this is what we have as questions. Arcuturus last week asked you, can you give us a small roadmap to Android according to your experience?
Some roadmap on?
Map to Androids according to your experience.
You mean what's like the best way to learn Android development?
Yeah, small roadmap if you can.
The first thing I will say is, obviously, if you're more familiar with a Java background, you can just start continuing on doing Java with Android. Android is still working with Java. There is no problem there. But if you're starting, you don't have experience on Android nor with Java at all, I highly recommend you to start with Kotlin. First, it's much lighter to write, so it's less verbose, more practical. There's the nullability safe check that I mentioned earlier, but I will say first, you can start to learn with Kotlin. And we have a whole course on Kotlin, which is not tied to Android, it's just to learn Kotlin on Udacity for free. So it's in English, but there's a lot of text. It's really straight away. I advise to start with that if you're really not familiar with the Android ecosystem at all. After that, my team produced a whole course on how to learn Android from the beginning for free, again, on Udacity, both in Java, which is an old one, and a recent one with the recent APIs on Kotlin. And both of them, again, are free on Android, on Udacity. Whenever you really want to have something free, verified, tested, and checked by our team, those are the courses I highly recommend. So that's in terms of theory. Obviously, they have some exercise to practice with. But once you want to learn more samples, we have a lot of code labs. So code labs is kind of a interactive tutorial you have to go through on every API we have on Android nearly. So you have on storage, you have on how to architecture your app, you have on how to deal with the camera, how to deal with notifications on a lot of different parts of the Android APIs. You have code labs for them. And finally, in the end, if you want to see more like code, more samples, because that's where you're more comfortable, you always have our code samples on github.com/Android. And there is samples on nearly, again, all APIs that's maintained by me and my team. I mean, we're a lot of us, and all of us were writing on that. So those are just in terms of code. After that, I recommend, like, I'm doing the videos on what's new in Android. Every time we have a new version, I'm making a video nowadays. So I've started with Android 3.4 normally, if I don't say mistake, or 3.5. The next one on Android 4.1 is coming up soon. I always recommend to follow some people on Twitter, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we're putting content to help you getting up to date, learning the good tips and tricks about Android. Because obviously, I'm pretty sure you're all aware how Android can be really big, how many APIs there is. You don't have to force yourself learning everything. There is still a lot of APIs, even me, I don't know, and that's normal, that's okay. I will highly advise you to choose the APIs you're more comfortable with. If you really want to make a really beautiful application, focus on the one related to UI, related to animations. if you're more interested about dealing with storage, about saving files with the camera, you should focus on those APIs, but don't try to learn everything from the beginning because it's just too hard and it may seem too complex. Start by the part where you're more keen to learn, and from there start to move and learn more about the rest of the Android ecosystem. But just don't go and try to learn everything from the beginning. It's just too big and it will make you so tired in the end.
So the question was from Marija Nassim. Why should we choose Android 11 over cross-platform?
In terms of cross-platform, I'm pretty sure you think about Flutter or React Native. So I played with React Native, even like Apache, Cordova, PhoneGap, and even Flutter recently, just because I was curious on them. I think those platforms are good if your application is not really specific to one platform. In a sense, if you don't want to have the best experience, if it's just a simple app, you can even make some complex applications, but at some point, there is always differences between iOS and Android. The way you handle the camera is different. The way you may handle the storage is different. The way you have the notifications are different. For example, bubbles, as I mentioned earlier, are only on Android. You don't have them on iOS. And there is a lot of APIs like that that are just completely different. There is different user experience. If you're making a cross-platform, it's good if your application is just simple enough to be the same on both platforms, but users, they have expectation. If you're a social media, social networking application where you can send messages, well, people will now expect you have bubbles. If you don't have, they will not be completely satisfied. That's why at some point, you have to be not fully cross-platform, you have to be specific to the platform, because each platform behaves differently, and users from each platform have different expectations. Don't assume they all want the same thing. That's why I say cross-platform is good at some point, but you will always need a really deeper integration at some point.
So we have a question from Abu Zahar. He say, off topic a little bit. Can you tell us about the feature of Kotlin multi-platform?
So Kotlin multi-platform is a work that is mostly pushed by JetBrains. JetBrains is the company that created initially Kotlin, and have been creating and still working on them on the IntelliJ, which is the base of what we use for Android Studio. So Android Studio is a fork of IntelliJ, and there is a lot of other IDE they're famous for. What they've been doing, and we're helping them there, but it's mostly, again, work by JetBrains, is the goal on mobile application. As I mentioned, the UI, the experience is really different between iOS and Android. But there is some logic that is the same you can share between both platforms. For example, let's say you want to calculate the age of a person. It's really simple. You just have to do this year minus the year of birth of the person. It's really simple code, really stupid code in a way, but that code should be only written once because it's not specific to a platform. It's just simple logic. So for all logic code, what JetBrains is doing and what we're helping them is to allow you to write in Kotlin and share that logic code, so not tied to the UI, really just logic code, between iOS and Android. So here the goal is really, if you have logic not tied to a platform, just pure logic, business logic, in this case, it can be interesting to just write it once rather than having to write in Swift or Objective-C and writing in Kotlin for Android. So that's what's the Kotlin multi-platform project by JetBrains, at least the mobile one. They have another multi-platform one which is running Kotlin everywhere, including desktop, but at least the mobile multi-platform, this is the goal of it.
So another question from, again, Aaron Nerox. He said, when the support for Google Photo Library API is coming for Android?
The Google what, sorry?
Sorry. The support for Google Photo Library API is coming for Android.
The Google Photos, so okay, it's specific to Google Photo. To be honest here, I have no idea. The Google Photo is a completely different team, so I have no idea if they will have a support, when they will have that support. Sorry, there, I just have no information. I don't know.
Why did the new release of Android 11 took too much time?
Took too much time? I don't think it takes too much time, because yeah, usually we announce it in Android at the Google I/O, so yeah, supposedly in May, but it's never the final release in May. Usually it's September or October, so we're not that late. I mean, like Android 10, which was the Q version, it was released in end of September or October, so it was similar timeline.
And I think that's the final question from Akram Boutushand. He said, I have a question about Jetpack Compose. Can we expect any integration of Jetpack navigation component into Compose World, or we should use external library?
So yeah, I know this is really expected library. We have been working on it, so I know for sure there is already some work in progress about the navigation component. So people have been used to the navigation component libraries with Jetpack previously. They really like it, and we like it too. So it's definitely coming up. I don't know yet when is the timeline, but I know for sure they're definitely working on it. So the code is already there. I don't know if it's fully functional or not, but it's definitely the two engineers working on it are definitely working on it. It's like it's Ian Lake and Jeremy Wood, and they're definitely working on it. So it's coming up. Don't worry.
So I think this is it, Mr. Yacine. Thank you very much for your talk and for answering our questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Yacine.
It was my
and
pleasure.
now I think that yeah, thank you very much. I hope we can see you another time in another talk.
Me too.
So thank you very much, guys, for being with us, for attending this talk, and we will see you soon. Thank you, guys.